So you haven't read The Remains of the Day by Sir Katsuyo Ishiguro? Well, allow us to be of service and introduce you to this much-acclaimed novel. Since its publication in 1989, The Remains of the Day received the Booker Prize for Fiction, has been included on numerous best-of-all-time lists, and author Ishiguro has received the Nobel Prize for Literature. Not to mention, it was adapted in 1993 into a much-lauded film version. The story is told in the first person by Stevens, an English butler, and is ostensibly his account of a week-long holiday in southern England in the late 1950s. However, since this is the first time Stevens has taken an extended break from work, he spends most of it reflecting on his time as a butler to Lord Darlington, particularly on his relationships with his employer, his own father, and the estate's housekeeper, Miss Kenton. Stevens is also an example of an unreliable narrator, a character whose accounts of events cannot be entirely trusted. In his case, the commitment to his role as a loyal butler is so complete that he isn't always honest with himself about his feelings. But say, let's put you in his well-polished shoes and see how reliable your own narration is. You are Mr. Stevens, and for over 3 decades, you've been the butler at the Darlington Hall. The manor has recently been purchased by an American named Mr. Faraday, but for most of your life, you worked for the estate's previous owner, Lord Darlington. And when Mr. Faraday hears that you've not ever taken a vacation, he encourages you to take a holiday. Around this time, you also receive a letter from the estate's former housekeeper, Miss Kenton, who left to get married 20 years earlier. But you detect some hints in the letter that suggest she might want to leave her husband and return to Darlington Hall. Kismet! You decide to take up Mr. Faraday on his offer, so you can enjoy some sightseeing. Oh, and of course, visit Miss Kenton and invite her to rejoin the manor's staff, if there's time. But as you drive further and further away from Darlington Hall, your thoughts drift back to your days serving Lord Darlington between the wars. You stayed in his employ for 33 years, until his death, and were extremely loyal to the man, because you felt it was your professional duty. After World War I, Lord Darlington took a strong interest in convincing the Allies to lift some of these stricter provisions of the Treaty of Versailles in order to relieve some suffering in Germany. This led him to hosting a number of off-the-records meetings with European politicians for years. And you believed that it was your duty to maintain your professional facade, no matter the circumstances, in order to ensure that Lord Darlington's events were successful. In fact, during one such meeting, your father suffered a stroke. But you opted to remain at your post, serving faithfully, even as he lay dying a few rooms above you in the manor. But the event was a success, and you consider this to be one of your finest professional hours. This was also around the time that Miss Kenton came to work as housekeeper. You and she had similar high professional standards, and developed a warm professional relationship that maybe could have become something more. Nope, banish that thought. Strictly professional. In fact, you did everything you could to maintain the collegial status of your relationship. Even when she caught you reading that cheesy romance novel, huh? Oh, it was so you could learn English better. I mean, why else would that be? All right, straighten up your hair, Stevens. We'll give you a moment. Sir Katsuyo Ishiguro is one of Britain's most versatile writers. His catalog includes novels, screenplays, and even music. He's also received a dozen awards and honors for his writing, including being appointed a Knight Bachelor for his service to literature. Inspired by Bob Dylan, Ishiguro originally planned to be a musician. So, award-winning novelist was kind of his fallback career. Though music continues to influence his writing. In fact, he cites a particular moment in the Tom Waits song, Ruby Arms, where the singer breaks through his restrained facade and expresses his heartbreak as particularly influential on The Remains of the Day. However, since Tom waits for no man, I see you seeing what I did there. Let's get back to your own breakthrough. As you encounter various people on your holiday, you note that for some reason, you're unwilling to admit that you worked for Lord Darlington. That's odd. Well, at first, you insist that this is because you don't want to hear false comments about his reputation. But eventually, you realize that maybe Lord Darlington wasn't the great man you thought he was. For example, right after insisting that Lord Darlington's reputation as a Nazi sympathizer and an anti-Semite was false, you do recollect a time that he had you fire 2 of the estate's best maids for being Jewish. A choice you silently disagreed with, but felt it wasn't your place to question him. This event caused a rift between you and Miss Kenton, until a year later when you revealed to her that you didn't agree with Lord Darlington's decision. She was shocked that you didn't tell her this at the time, and you were shocked that she would think you agreed with him. Then you recall another proud day of your time as a butler, when Lord Darlington was hosting a confidential meeting between the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister of Nazi Germany regarding appeasement. On that day, Miss Kenton announced to you that she was getting married and leaving the estate, with a hint that she'd stay if you asked her to. And even as she wept in another room, you again maintained your professional dignity and helped the meeting go off perfectly. just maybe, though you can barely admit it to yourself, this trip will give you a second chance with Miss Kenton. But when you finally meet her, it's clear she intends to stay with her husband, so you don't bring up the idea of her returning. And it's at that very moment you realize you gave up all of your hopes for love and happiness for the sake of maintaining your professional dignity in service of an unworthy man. And all that's left for you now, perhaps, is to try to enjoy the last years of your life, the titular remains of the day, as best you can. By allowing decorum to prevent self-reflection, Stevens, in the remains of the day, doesn't realize until it's too late that the sacrifices he made weren't worth it. And through reading the novel, we're invited to ask ourselves if we'll be able to live with our own decisions, and if we should perhaps think more carefully about our choices in the here and now.